Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network, and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on March 5th, 2022, and is current through both the Star Trek Picard episode, The Stargazer, and the Star Trek Discovery episode, Rosetta, so beware of spoilers. And if you are in one of the regions where Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Prodigy has not yet aired, and you are trying to stay spoiler-free, be sure to check out the episode article on TrekCore for time codes for each of our stories tonight in order to avoid them. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is the host of the Queersplaining podcast. It's Callie Wright. Callie, welcome to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. I'm very, very stoked.
All right, Callie. Well, I ask my guests this question every week. I want to know something's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Oh, God, that's such a great framing of this question. I am just excited about, and maybe this is too easy, but I've really just been thinking with, the pending finale of the current season of Discovery and the premiere of Picard, I really am thinking on the idea that this is like the golden age of Star Trek. And I'm thinking about how, I was a kid just old enough to remember like the last few seasons of TNG, the whole run of DS9, the whole run of Voyager. And that very much felt like, as a kid, I'm thinking like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the coolest time to be a nerd. And when it was over with, I was like, cool, like that was a cool time in my life. I don't know that that will ever come again, but I'm glad it happened. And I really feel like I'm there again. And I have my gripes about Star Trek like any other nerd does.
You wouldn't be a Star Trek fan if you didn't.
Right. But I'm so stoked on what Trek has going on. And it's just such a great time to be a Star Trek fan. I'm like approaching 40 and in some ways remembering what it felt like to be like a 12-year-old kid being really excited for the next episode to come out. And it's been very, very good for me.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm super excited about Star Trek Picard and the premiere, but let's just dwell on, as you say, this sort of moment in time for a second, right? In which this week, for the first time, we had 2 live action episodes of Star Trek drop on the same day. It's the first time we've had 2 episodes of new Star Trek in a week live action since 1999. Right? Like we had 1 week in October in which we got Star Trek Discovery and we got the pilot for Star Trek Prodigy. But yeah, this is for live action Star Trek. This is the first time since the late 90s when things were, starting to wind down a little bit. And now we've got 2 more weeks of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard double headers. Then we've got, I think, like 6 weeks of just Star Trek Picard after that. Then we've got 1 week of Strange New World Picard double header. And then we're into Strange New Worlds. And then we're into Lower Deck Season 3. And then we're into Star Trek Prodigy Season 1.5. I mean, it is a good time to be a Star Trek fan. That is for sure.
Yeah. And I don't know that this is fully confirmed, but like we are living in a world where it's realistic to think that we might actually have new Star Trek every week for the rest of this year.
Yeah.
Which just blows my mind.
It totally does. I think they might gift us a couple of weeks off in July, but other than that, it's very realistic to say we're in a full-on sprint now through the end of this year and honestly into 2023 as well, because I think once we get to January and they've done Lower Deck Season 3 and they've done Prodigy Season 1.5, hey, guess what? It's time for Star Trek Picard Season 3. I think that's coming early next year. So there is lots to look forward to.
And then I imagine it, in that timeline, we know, Season 5 of Discovery is well underway, and
2 of Strange New Worlds is filming right now.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I'm so excited about it, and so many of the stories in best Trek fashion have been so prescient to this current moment, and also just like in my personal life, there's just a lot that I'm like, wow, did they write that episode about me?
All right, well, let's get into talking about all the fun and goodness this week. So with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
Well, with the premiere of Star Trek Picard Season 2 and its huge season opener, there have been a rash of new interviews about the return of Picard, its story for Season 2, and hints about what that might mean for the upcoming Season 3. In an interview with TrekMovie.com, the new showrunner for Star Trek Picard, Terry Matalas, spoke about the overarching narrative for Season 2. He said, quote, "I think it's very much about what Star Trek has always been about, the horizon. Only this season, it's not the horizon of cosmic discovery or galactic politics. It's about what's next for us as people, not as humanity, but as humans. What do we want in our careers, our relationships? How do we reconcile the dueling voices inside our heads, the push-pull within all of us that tells us to either stay or leave, fight or flight, love or let go? Q isn't a plot character. He's a character. He's the figure you introduce when your heroes need to face their truest selves. And that's what Picard and his crew are forced to do this season, run the gauntlet, face themselves, and decide who and what they want to become." And on the decision to include both Q and Guinan in the season premiere, Matalas said, quote, "It was very organic. In an episode in which Q is going to launch Picard into this strange future, it only felt right that Jean-Luc needed some perspective on his past. Who is he now? How he needs to change? Why he's so rife with indecision? And while Q provides the push, only Guinan can call Picard out on his own bullshit. She has the freedom to real talk him in a way that even his closest crew members never could. Guinan very much sets the emotional stakes for Picard in this first episode. She lays out the roadmap, and Q places him on the path to an important life-altering choice." Matalas also talked about the latest changes to Starfleet uniform design, indicating that the variation on the Picard design seen in Season 1 was driven by the showrunner's love for the original Star Trek movies and the monster maroon uniform that debuted in The Wrath of Khan. And as for the mysterious Season 3, well, Matalas has this update to offer. Quote, "We're very nearly completed production. By the time this runs, we'll be days away from the finish line. And while I can't say much, I will say this. I think it's shaping up to be an extraordinary season of television. It's incredibly different from the 2 seasons before it, and it features quite possibly one of the all-time great Star Trek villain performances we've seen to date. But I don't want to oversell it in the early stages. There's miles yet to go. But I hope we're concluding Picard's story in the best, most appropriate, most satisfying way. I can't wait for fans to see what we have in store." Well, Callie, based on the season, first of all, what did you think about the season premiere of Star Trek Picard?
Oh, I was blown away. And that is exactly what I think I love about Picard, because, as a kid, Captain Picard was space dad for me. I grew up without a father figure in my life. And when I came into Next Generation, it was Season 3, Season 4-ish, after the show had really, really found its legs. And so I very much looked up to Captain Picard as a sort of father figure. And I, as an adult, went through the same sort of thing that a lot of adults do when they find out their parents are real people with flaws and there are things they don't like about them, right? Yeah. And obviously, when you're talking about a real person, you have the chance to address those things with people. And I can talk with my parents about, things they did during my childhood that hurt me or whatever. And we can come together and reconcile those things and talk as adults. But of course, with fictional characters, you don't get the chance to do that. And Season 1 of Picard felt very cathartic in that way, seeing people who are not as impressed with Picard as everyone else seems to be. I was thank you, because I would be saying the same thing over the dinner table with Dad. I love you. You're great. But get your shit together. And in seeing, first of all, hearing that there's going to be even more of that in Picard Season 2, seeing that in the first episode, that's just so much what I want as an adult who was a Star Trek fan when TNG was airing. I want to get to know this guy as a real person. And I think there's something very important to say in that about our cultural need to have hero figures. Mm-hmm. And this idea that that's not a real thing. It feels good to latch onto those things in fiction, but it's also really important to understand that those things don't exist in real life. And to have that play out in a way with a character like Picard, where the show is no. You don't have to dislike him. You don't have to throw him away and find oh no, he's a terrible person. But for it to be no, he's a great man, good Starfleet officer, but he's got a lot of shit of his own to work out. I just think that's such a powerfully perfect way to take that character. And I'm so excited to see where it goes with Laris in particular. She's just so unafraid to be listen, I love you, but you're full of shit. And it's just, it brings me so much joy.
Yeah, obviously, absolutely loved the season 2 premiere of Star Trek Picard. It was probably one of the most exciting episodes of Star Trek that I have seen since it came back in 2017. And there's been a ton of great episodes. That's not speaking badly about, anything else that has come prior, just that I thought this was really, really good. And I think on that point you were making, Callie, around sort of the themes behind the season, one of the things that I've been reflecting on a little bit is, this sort of season premiere, and obviously the season itself could go in a very different direction. We'll confess or at least I'm about to make a sweeping judgment about season 2 based off of only having seen one episode. But, I enjoyed season 1 very much, but a lot of the key thematic elements from that first season directly related to things that had to do with the character's experiences after the last time we saw him, right? Mm-hmm. He had been made an admiral. The Romulan supernova evacuation had not gone the way he intended it to. The synth ban. And while it was really interesting to kind of deconstruct the character and those experiences, the show had a lot of work to do to both kind of introduce you to that and then to sort of set about having the character kind of deal with it. Whereas I think at the start of season 2 already, we're seeing this really interesting theme around Picard's lack of attachment, romantic involvement. And of course, that for us as longtime TNG fans, right, that goes all the way back to Encounter at Farpoint. That's not something Absolutely. We need a whole, like 3 episodes to introduce us to and explain the backstory for. It's just like, oh, yeah, Picard bottled it at the last minute with Laris. Totally get that. Like we understand, what's going on in this character's head, and now we're excited to kind of learn about it and unpack it. So, ships and Starfleet and all of that element aside, and we'll certainly talk more about that in the next story, but like just looking directly at that character piece of Picard, just the themes of this season already are just ones that feel very comfortably familiar to longtime TNG fans.
Yeah, and I will confess, I got to attend the virtual premiere, which I feel very, very fortunate about. So I've seen episode 2, and I'm trying to keep my mouth shut about the things that happen in episode 2. But yeah, that's a thing that I think they have really, really tried to do in this last season of Discovery, because in the first couple of seasons, I'm a huge Discovery fan, but one critique I've had of it is that it feels like the stakes are so high, it's been hard to really, really get to know the characters.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we don't know them at all, but we haven't gotten to know them as much as maybe I would like. Like, I don't feel like there's room in Discovery's style for an episode like Data's Day, right? With like super low stakes story where we just learn a whole lot more about a couple of the people on the ship. And I feel like this current season has done such a good job. Well, and season 3, really. Season 3 and 4 both have done a really good job, I think, of bridging that gap between there's like this really high stakes storyline, wild stuff is happening, everyone's in danger, but we do get these really fun, intimate character moments where people are like growing and communicating and learning more about each other. And it feels like Picard is gonna like throw it even more in that direction.
Yeah.
And honestly, like that excites me because I love like sci-fi action, but I also love in that context, in that world, people still like getting to know each other and digging out of trauma together and all of that sort of stuff. Those themes really mean a lot to me as well. And if I have any critique of Discovery, it's that I feel like the first couple of seasons didn't do the best at that specific part of it. But the last 2 seasons, I feel like have done a really good job. And to hear that Picard is maybe headed even more in that direction, like really, really excites me. And, nothing but empathy for the people making that show, because I imagine, I don't know who they think of as their primary audience, right? But I think they have to have at least a little bit of thought towards like, this has to be at least halfway interesting to people who didn't grow up with TNG, right?
Yes.
Like we still have to make this make sense. But at the same time, we also have to make this make sense to people who love these characters and have known these characters most of their lives. And so like, I don't know, I feel obligated to give a little bit of grace on that front because I cannot imagine how tough a thing that is to go between.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. I think you're absolutely right about that, right? I mean, of course it is, there's the stuff that that is for us. But if it was just for us, then there would be no reason to make any more of it because, there's only so many of us. And ultimately the franchise wants to bring in new people who want to love it just as much as we do and get to know it just as well. So yeah, I think that's a really critical point.
Well, and I also think the beauty of having this many shows at once, I think there's a couple of different entry points into the franchise, right? And so if somebody's like, it's 2022, I've heard about this Star Trek thing, I want to get into it, where do I start? I don't have just that to give them, right?
Right.
Because I'm like, I'd need to spend at least a good 20 or 30 minutes giving you the broadest of background strokes for you to understand what's happening with this character in this moment. Whereas I feel like with Discovery, like your experience is enhanced if you come to it with a deep knowledge of Star Trek, but I definitely don't think it's necessary. And with Lower Decks as well, I was actually surprised. I've met more than a couple of people who were like, I've never watched Star Trek before, but Lower Decks looks interesting, so I'm going to give it a shot. And they loved it. And so I think that's not, for Picard, I don't think that's a huge problem such that they need to like base the entire show around it. But I imagine that is a thing they're thinking about, and that's got to be tough.
Well, while the characters and story of Star Trek Picard have obviously gotten a lot of attention, what's also receiving a ton of buzz online, including from this Star Trek fan, with a large number of starship designs, old and new, that appeared throughout the episode. Speaking with Ryan Britt at Inverse.com, Star Trek Picard art designer Dave Blass, who is already becoming something of a folk hero among Star Trek fans, talked about the decisions made behind the Starfleet Task Force and how the production pulled it off. Quote, "We got the script and found out we were going to do a new ship, and that ship was going to be the Stargazer, and that there was going to be a whole fleet in this episode too," Blass explained about the season 2 premiere. And at the same time, the season 1 finale drops, and fans had a reaction to the Zhang He fleet, and they were not happy. "I know that there are a lot of practical reasons why things happen," Blass says of the season 1 fleet of mostly identical Inquiry-class ships, "but I was like, okay, I wonder if there's a way to solve this problem, to turn the obstacle into an opportunity." Blass goes on to explain that he enlisted the help of the Star Trek Online development team to help plug the gaps in Starship digital assets that the Picard production team was missing, and that provided an opportunity for 4 of the Star Trek Online starships to migrate over to canon in the process. "Some of those models are from the game," Thomas Morone, associate art director for Star Trek Online, said in the interview. "But we also helped with some existing canon ships. We had a great back catalogue of canon ships. They took our models and textures and brought them into their pipeline." And on the new Stargazer, Blass explains why the ship has a different registry number from Picard's Stargazer and not a letter designation, as fans have come to expect from the Enterprise. Quote, "I dropped the hammer on this one," he reveals. "The Stargazer is an important ship, but it does not hold the status in the Federation that the Enterprise had. I didn't feel it was warranted, because then every ship gets it and it becomes a thing. The Stargazer did not have that legacy." Blass went on to explain that this decision is actually justified by existing canon. The USS Intrepid appears multiple times throughout the history of the franchise with different registry numbers each time. And don't forget, the successor Defiant in Deep Space Nine also had a different registry number from the original destroyed in the Changing Face of Evil. Callie, did you enjoy all these starship appearances in Star Trek Picard Season 2?
Oh my God, did I ever?
I know, wasn't that so cool?
And I gotta say, like, I understand that people were a little bummed about the fleet at the end of season 1.
Yeah.
In my mind, it makes sense. Like, if you get a design that works so well, why not just make a bunch of them, Especially if you're going to defend a planet from an existential threat, right? Like, if you've got the best class of ship to like really wreck shit, then you're going to take as many of that ship as possible to this mission, right? So like the people who were bummed about it, I don't think they were being silly or overreacting or anything like that. I get it, but personally, it wasn't a problem for me as much. But I also am just a super nerd for starship design. And when I was watching through I went back and rewatched episode 1 after the premiere, and I was, I paused the screen and was trying to, look at the screen. And there were a couple of people on Twitter who like took screenshots and did all kinds of analysis. And it was very, very wonderful to watch. And it's so cool. Like I imagine, working at Star Trek Online and getting that phone call, like, "Oh, hey, by the way, we want to put your shit in the game, or we want to put your shit in the show and make it canon," right? Yep. That's got to be so cool. And it speaks so highly to the talent of those designers that, they looked at those ship designs and were like, "No, actually, we can use those on screen. That's great." Because I think people who design assets for use in games like that probably don't get as much cred as they deserve for the amount of work and talent and effort that goes into that. And especially, for a game like Star Trek Online, I am not an online gamer, so my perspective could be a little off on this, but my understanding is that Star Trek Online is a pretty niche game, right? Like it's not it's certainly not on the level of like World of Warcraft or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And so I imagine the folks who do that design work on the game probably don't enjoy the accolades they deserve for how good their work is, and I personally love seeing people who do good work really, really get their moment,
Yeah.
And I do this thing in my head. I like create movies in my head, and I'm just imagining the person in charge, like calling a Zoom meeting, because, this had to have happened a long time ago, maybe before it was safe to get everybody together in a room. But I can just imagine jumping on a Zoom call and the person delivering that news just absolutely bursting at the seams and everyone crying, "Oh my God, our ships are going to be on screen. This is fucking incredible." And just like seeing other people who are that passionate and that talented get to do their thing and have it just elevated in a way like that, it makes me so happy as a fellow nerd and just brilliantly executed. I love the design so much. I'm an LCARS nerd, just like hardcore LCARS nerd. I love LCARS so much. And the LCARS that we saw in season 1, those very pleasing shades of blue, that whole color palette, it's just, it's the best.
Oh, yes. And I will say, I too am not a Star Trek Online player, but, I know something of what the Star Trek Online fans must be feeling. Well, I mean, aside from the ungrateful dicks who were being really mean about the fact that they wanted something, because Star Trek Online have been saying there's some really big news coming, And when it was, that the ships were in Picard, there were a bunch of people who were like, yeah, that's incredible. And then there were a small handful of very rude people who were like, oh, well, I thought it was going to be something to do with the game. But anyway.
God. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised about that, but still. God.
But I'm a huge fan of the books, and Discovery has kind of brought elements of the books into canon. Obviously, Lower Decks did, and now Star Trek Picard did. The Luna class, which was the USS Titan, obviously has shown up in Lower Decks a couple of times, but now also is seen in that big fleet of ships in the Stargazer. So, it's such a great feeling that these things that you love and have sort of only lived in your head, finally translate over to the screen. And as you say, I can only imagine how much cooler that is if you actually made it and now you're seeing it on the screen. And I think obviously Star Trek fans are a very critical bunch. We'll sort of take that as read, right? And can be like really mean about stuff a lot of the time. And I think, one of the really interesting things is that, and sometimes, I don't know that it necessarily feels that way, but it certainly is true. I think they really are listening, right? Like Dave Blass says, we saw the reaction to the fleet from the end of in Arcadia Ego Part 2, and we were like, okay, we got to pick our game up and we got to do something different for this opening episode of season 2 of Star Trek Picard. So, I think that directly comes from a consequence of listening to fan feedback, and that speaks really highly of everybody involved in the production that they would do that.
And it makes it very clear that they chose people who are genuinely fans of Star Trek to work on new Star Trek, right? And I am not someone who thinks that new Star Trek has to resemble old Star Trek to be good, but I do think it has to feel at least familiar, right? There have to be things that signal that these things are all happening in the same universe, if not at the same time. And, at least in my opinion, they've really, really done that well, especially, the fact that so much of the most familiar Star Trek designs were made in the 90s, right? The early 90s, late 80s, and now they're producing a TV show in 2022, and there's the capability to do so much more than there was then. There's got to be this very strong urge to be like, I would love to just ignore everything that happened in the late 80s and early 90s because we can do so much more now, and we're being held back by this need to feel similar to the old thing. And I feel like they've done such a good job of updating the designs for more modern sensibilities while keeping it very, very familiar. And especially, I think with LCARS, the bridge of the Stargazer just felt so like, yes, this is a TV show being made today with modern capabilities, but it does feel like a Starfleet ship a la what I'm familiar with from Next Gen and Voyager and DS9. Like, it feels like these things can exist together just in, a decades apart. And I think that's very specifically because we have designers who are big Star Trek fans and really want to do the franchise justice. And I'm very excited about that. And it makes me feel very good that the franchise is in those folks' hands.
And I think we can't underestimate how difficult it was to put this fleet together, right? I mean, that's part of the reason why the one at the end of season 1 is a, right, people have sort of labeled it the copy and paste fleet. They
Right.
wanted to do 4 distinct designs, ran out of time, and were only able to do variations on the one design. And that was, sort of as much as they were able to do. But, lots of people are like, well, they managed it in the 90s where they had all of these ships show up. Why can't they do that now? And the reality is, well, they built up those assets over a long period of time, right? You built one ship for one episode, and then you saved it in a folder. And then if you needed it, you could come back to it later. And of course, with the gap in time between when Star Trek went off the air and today, many of those original assets no longer exist or aren't in the possession of the production. And so if you want a Sovereign class ship or an Akira class ship or an Excelsior class ship, all of which showed up in this episode, you have to build them, and you have to build them from scratch or go out and find someone who's got them. I mean, all credit to Dave Blass for, sort of figuring out the most economical way of doing it, which is, hey, somebody out there in this, has a digital model. They went to the Star Trek Online guys. They probably could have gone to the Eagle Moss guys who've got 3D models of all of these ships too. And they got them that way, did their thing, improved them, made them screen ready and shoved them on television. And that's the sort of moxie that I think, it's sort of reflective of that kind of old production team from the original shows who are very much just like, well, we've got a shoestring budget, but we're going to maximize the hell out of it as much as possible.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I imagine if the internet was as accessible back then as it was today, you would have people screaming about how some of the on-screen models were literally like off-the-shelf hobby model kits that they, sort of like redecorated for budget reasons. Right. Yep. You would have had people saying the exact same silly shit about that as they do about the CGI models. And I think in hindsight, people are willing to give a lot on older Star Trek because when you think about it, it's like, no, this was a weekly, like mid-budget sci-fi show with a very, very distinct, very limited budget, and they just did what they could. But I don't think people understand that that's still the case. Like, they still have a budget. It's not unlimited. I'm sure they're paying Patrick Stewart a fuck ton of money out of that budget. And so there's still a budget. There's still time constraints, and I don't think people quite understand how much work goes into building a CGI model like that. I mean, like, I do 3D modeling as a hobby, and it is unbelievable how much work goes into just like doing a 3D model of a prop that you can do for cosplay, right? Like, that is an incredible amount of work. And to do a fully detailed starship design that is screen ready, like, I don't think people quite understand the scale of the work that entails and are therefore unwilling to give any grace on that. And I think that's silly.
Well, if you are a California Star Trek fan, or you can find your way to Los Angeles at some point in the next 5 to 15 days, get ready for another cool Star Trek experience for you to enjoy. To celebrate the premiere of Star Trek Picard, Paramount are launching the 10 Forward experience, which will open Thursday, March 10th and close 10 days later on Sunday, March 20th. The bar experience, it's a fully working bar, is a recreation of the 10 Forward bar that Picard visits Guinan in the season 2 premiere, The Stargazer, with much of the decor, glassware, and furniture transported directly from the Picard set. Tickets are $25 each and available only for customers who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Tickets can be purchased at 10forwardtheexperience.com. Callie, were you a fan of the 10 Forward bar in Star Trek Picard Season 2?
Oh, God, absolutely. I was so excited when it showed up in the trailer because I was like, wait a minute, there's a bar. Who runs the bar? Oh, that's what they're doing. Like, I had that mental train of thought that was like, why are we in a bar? Oh, I know why we're in a bar. And because I remembered it was on, what is the show that Whoopi Goldberg is on? The View, I think.
The View, yes.
And, Patrick Stewart was on it, and he did the like, I'd like you to join me for Picard Season 2. And I think a lot of people had forgotten about that because a lot of people were like, she better be in Season 2. We've not heard anything about it.
Yeah, I think I was one of them.
Yeah. And I was like, almost everything about these shows remains secret until very, very close to the time they premiere. Yes. And so the fact that they've not bragged about it really doesn't mean anything, I don't think. So yeah, I was very, very excited. It feels very Guinan. Obviously, Guinan is mysterious. We don't know a ton about her, but I do think it matches her vibe. And I love the fact that it's called 10 Forward because of the significance that, I mean, she's hundreds of years old, and that's what she chose to name her bar on Earth, where she could name anything. Yeah, it's just very, very cool. And I am on like the opposite side of the country from Los Angeles. And I thought very, very hard about like, what can I sell to get a plane ticket to LA to go try to do this?
Yeah. Do I have any clients in California that need me right now?
Right. Put it on tour. Put it on tour for the love of God.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, neither you nor I will be able to attend the 10 Forward experience. But hey, if you're a LA or California-based Star Trek fan and you can get there, by all means, I'd encourage you to do it. I mean, just having seen pictures of this sort of pop-up experience, the cast photos for Star Trek Picard that were released last week, those were also taken on the same set. I think, not at the time of production. They were taken recently at wherever this pop-up location is. It's a really cool, really intricate set. I mean, there's even things like, we noticed over at TrekCore, there were photographs up on the wall of fans in cosplay, the kind of thing where it's so sort of, in the background. It doesn't really show up on screen. It's just sort of there, but it's like a cool touch, right? If you're watching the show and, you kind of spot a quick glimpse of, so like there's an Australian Star Trek fan called Ian McLean, who is very famous for cosplaying this Andorian character, does it at all these conventions, called Therin of Andor. And there's a picture of Therin of Andor up on the wall in 10 Forward. And I think it's visible in one of the shots in the Picard season 2 premiere. So like, again, same as the Star Trek Online Starship designers, and how cool is it that your stuff is now actually showing up on screen? How cool it is for, some of these fans who are now seeing themselves on screen. And it's just one of these, like, and of course, there's all these other, what you would expect, kind of Guinan pictures of her and friends like Picard and Crusher and, others, many of which are sort of taken from publicity stills from the series or from the movies. But yeah, I think this is going to be a really cool experience. If you can go do it, absolutely go do it, because you can get up close and personal and see all of the, like, really detailed stuff that the art department for Star Trek Picard put together, which of course is never going to show up on screen, but hey, now you get the chance to get up close and personal with it. And I think I also saw in the press release they talked about, and we're Star Trek fans, so merchandise is near and dear to our heart, that there will be some exclusive merchandise available for sale at the 10 Forward experience, which will not be available anywhere else. So an extra reason to be jealous if you can get there.
For sure. And I do remember seeing, I forget who posted it on Twitter, but it's not the location where they shot the bar, but it is the set that is on screen.
It was Dave Blass, the art director,
so cool.
Who said, it's the same set. Yeah, they've moved it all, but it's the same stuff from on screen.
And also, just like as a liquor nerd, like I love good whiskey, especially, just big fan of that. I am deeply curious. Obviously, they put a ton of work into the sets, and I'm wondering if they put as much effort into the like signature cocktails and like what kind of liquors they're using. Very, very interesting to me as a nerd. And I always wonder, because oftentimes, unfortunately, those things get, they use the sort of bottom of the shelf stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So interested to see how that works out too.
Well, and lastly this week, in news that is entirely unrelated to Star Trek Picard Season 2, Eastside Games have announced they are working on a Star Trek Lower Decks free-to-play mobile game for release later this year, entitled Star Trek Lower Decks: The Badgie Directive. The game's synopsis reads as follows. Finally, after yet another tedious duty roster, the Lower Decks crew of the USS Cerritos is ready to party at a Zebulon Sisters concert. Tendy's even more excited, as this will be her first choo-choo dance, but first they need to get through routine training exercises on the holodeck, which Boimler has been entrusted to organize. Boimler, with power, when has that ever been good? Impatient to get to the dance, the crew try to end the simulation, only to find the Cerritos' computer has been hijacked by rogue AI Badgie. He's locked them in the holodeck and deactivated all safety protocols. So now Boimler, Tendy, Rutherford, and Mariner must work through Star Trek stories, both familiar and new, so they can return to the real world. But be careful, if they don't succeed, they'll die for real, and even worse, they'll miss the party. The game is expected to initially launch in Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines on iOS, and expand to Android users and the rest of the world, quote, very, very soon. Callie, do you think you'll check out the Badgie Directive when it becomes available here in the US?
Absolutely, 110% I will. I am such a huge Lower Decks fan. I desperately hope it is not one of those games that's like free to play, but not really fun to play if you don't spend a ton of money on in-game purchases. I will be so mad if it turns out to be like that. But yeah, I am a gigantically huge Lower Decks fan. One day I will do a talk at a convention about how I think basically no one in the fandom takes Lower Decks as seriously as it deserves because it's a comedy. But I think Lower Decks is real and good Star Trek as any other. And I think a lot of people dismiss it because it's fun and it's silly and it's like kind of farcical in some ways. But I also think that it is also real and deeply good Star Trek. And anything that happens with Lower Decks, I'm just really, really excited about.
Yeah, this is really cool. I'm looking forward to this. I'm not a big game player, but this is definitely something that I will check out, especially since, just reading that synopsis, it has all of the hallmarks of what you would want from sort of a Lower Decks game. It clearly understands the show. It understands the kind of humor that's involved. And the press release does sort of talk about how, because they're in the holodeck, they can kind of go anywhere, that you'll see sort of familiar Star Trek characters, familiar Star Trek locales, that, it'll obviously be in a sort of very Lower Decksy way. But that's really cool because that's one of the things we sometimes enjoy the most about Lower Decks, is seeing some of those Lower Decks takes on familiar character designs and things like that. So yeah, I'm hoping very, very soon means that it's, imminent. I think the press release came out quicker than intended because the app got listed on the App Store in Australia and New Zealand, and someone noticed it, and then it started going around the internet, and then I think they just released it. So yeah, whoopsie. But hey, that's Star Trek fans for you. If there's something out there, we will find it.
Yep.
And so I think they've not got a release date yet for it in the US and the UK, but it does sound like, as I say, coming very, very soon, so it shouldn't be too long. I think they're probably just in like beta testing in Australia and New Zealand or something like that.
And I just love Badgie. Badgie is such the perfect Star Trek villain.
Yes, I'm always ready for more Badgie, 100%. Yeah. All right, well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, my guest and I give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Callie, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
I am really hoping that when we meet the 10C in Discovery, that it really comes down to people connecting and communicating, and that it doesn't come down to some sort of like weird technological solution or like fighting or any of that kind of stuff. Because I think what's been so personally relevant to me about the current season of Discovery is that so much of it is about finding ways to connect with people and communicate with people when it seems like there's like not a whole lot of chance that can happen.
Yeah.
Because that's just, for reasons that would take way too long to explain, that's just something that is deeply, deeply personal in this moment in my life. And the idea that the end of this huge high stakes arc comes down to people learning how to communicate and talk to each other, that's just incredible. And it's so deeply why I love Star Trek. And so that's my hope. That's my hope. And how I feel about Picard is very colored by the fact that I've seen episode 2. And so I'm just going to not say that.
Sure.
Aside from the fact that I think newer Star Trek has become so wonderfully queer, and I just need that to keep happening. And I want to see Ian and Blue get back together on screen.
Yeah, I think on the 10C, what you've described is what I want from the remainder of Star Trek Discovery. And I kind of think it is going in that direction, just because from everything we've seen up to this point in Rosetta, right? A very carefully titled episode with a very specific set of themes around species 10C being what I was really hoping they would be, which is very alien and very weird, right? Like, communicating through complex hydrocarbons. Hey, that's pretty alien and pretty weird as far as I'm concerned, and exactly what I was hoping for, that it wasn't going to be that the 10C were not going to be some humans wearing silicone appliances, right?
Right, yeah.
which of course, we love and more power to, all everything. But like having been set up as this major, sort of alien race who are operating with things and priorities that are very different from our own and understandings of the universe that are very different from our own, kind of the direction they're going in of showing us something very alien and different and new is super exciting. And yeah, I really hope they stick the landing on it. And as you say, the way out of this is not through force or firepower, but through learning to communicate and, sort of following through on those themes from Rosetta and bringing us all the way through this idea of like, how do you start a dialogue with an alien race who is so unique and different?
Yeah. And I think, if we think about some of the best moments of Star Trek, it is not where the storyline hinges on some minutia of culture that's different that you have to like figure out to how to get past, right? But how something about these two people, these two species, these two cultures is so fundamentally different as to be almost completely unrecognizable. And you have to figure out how to bridge that gap, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
I'm not the world's biggest Enterprise fan, but I do think Enterprise's best moments were in dealing with this, like, how do we deal with this situation that we are fundamentally unprepared for?
No, absolutely. Well, hey, 2 episodes left this season, big finale coming up. So we will see what happens. Well, let me give you my wish for this week, which is that I know we've only seen 1 episode of Star Trek Picard season 2, but you've seen episode 2 and I have also seen episode 2 and I might have seen episode 3 as well. And so I'm not obviously no spoilers or anything about, anything that's coming up in any episodes. That's not what my wish relates to, but I just want you to know that this wish is not going off of just having seen the season 2 premiere of Star Trek Picard, but on having seen the first third of the season. So my wish is this: we know that now definitively 100% Star Trek Picard is coming to an end with the conclusion of season 3, and that they are now, it's Saturday, March 5th, we're recording this. Yesterday, Terry Matalas said they were 3 days away from wrapping Star Trek Picard and being done with the show forever. And we still have 19 episodes to watch from co-showrunner Terry Matalas, from art director Dave Blass. And I would really like them to make more than 20 episodes of Star Trek together. So yeah, my wish is that I really hope that even though Terry Matalas' time on Star Trek Picard is coming to an end and Dave Blass's time on Star Trek Picard is coming to an end, that Alex Kurtzman, in his infinite wisdom, gives both of them another show to work on, because I have been really impressed by both of them. I mean, Terry, obviously, he got his start working on Star Trek Enterprise, and, that was sort of, obviously he's gone on to do incredible TV shows like 12 Monkeys on Sci-Fi, which was excellent. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. And, this is Dave Blass's first time working on Star Trek, but I've just been so impressed with everything that they have done so far, and their love for the franchise and commitment to it and wanting to kind of, go really deep into the details. I mean, Dave Blass has been sort of tweeting. He said he was going to hold off tweeting any behind the scenes details until Monday, but he's clearly just so excited about it. He's just started doing it now, because he can't hold it in anymore. And there's so much there that is just really cool and interesting and is right up the alley of so many Star Trek fans that it would be a shame if we only get 20 episodes from this duo. I would like to see a lot more. So if Alex Kurtzman has not locked in Terry Matalas and Dave Blass into some kind of deal to do more work on Star Trek, they should absolutely get on that as quickly as possible, because they'll otherwise get snapped up by other shows. And I think I want to keep them in the Star Trek franchise.
Hard agree. And also along those lines, I deeply hope they do not end Picard with Picard dying. I would be so mad if they ended up doing that. Yeah. So my theory a couple of weeks ago, and I continue, I just keep seeing more little tidbits that kind of lead me towards this theory being an accurate one, is that the series finale of Star Trek Picard is going to involve an on-screen reunion of most, if not all, of the TNG cast. And here's hoping that does not end with the death of Admiral Jean-Luc Picard. But hey, it sounds like one way or another, it is going to be a huge final episode of Picard. A wedding. I want it to end with him getting married to Laris.
Love it. Ooh, controversial, Callie. You're not going with Beverly?
My deepest wish, at least based on what we've seen before, or
Sure.
what we've seen so far.
No, don't get me wrong. I've abandoned any former allegiance teams I've had in the Picard shipping world, and I'm firmly on Team Laris at this point.
Yeah, God, I love her so much.
Oh yes,
Orla Brady is just so good.
Radiant. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, or Prodigy that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek or email them to me at weeklytrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Callie Wright, for joining me today. Callie, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, I am at Callie Gets It on Twitter. My podcast is called Queer Splaining. It's a queer and trans storytelling show, not specifically about Star Trek, but we definitely talk about Star Trek because I am who I am, and that is unavoidable. And I am also part of a queer Star Trek fan group called the Lambda Quadrant, and we'll have some cool stuff to announce about Mission Chicago very soon.
Oh, very exciting. Looking forward to that. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Callie. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.